Hey everyone, I hope you're doing well. If you're new to the channel, I upload every single Tuesday, so if you're into historical biographies, it'd mean a lot if you could subscribe, and well, stick around and I hope you enjoy. Thanks. The history of the American West in the 19th century is full of memorable characters, from Wyatt Earp, Billy the Kid, and Jesse James, to Annie Oakley, Calamity Jane, and many others. Today, we look at the life of one such figure who has largely been forgotten to history, Sarah Bowman, the Great Western. The woman who would later become known as the Great Western, as well as a range of different surnames, had a birth which was as mythical as later aspects of her life. It is not entirely clear when she was born, or indeed where, though most accounts tend to agree that she first came into the world sometime between 1812 and 1818, somewhere in the region where the Midwest meets the South, on the border between Missouri and Tennessee. She may have been born as Sarah Knight to an Irish-American family, which, given this surname and place of birth, would suggest she hailed from a family of Scottish-Irish emigrants who had arrived to the American South in the 18th century from Ulster in the north of Ireland. The shadowy circumstances of her birth are mirrored in accounts of her childhood and early adult years. We know little about her upbringing, and while she later claimed to have been born into a respectable family of good prospects, we can be sure that she was illiterate and could not read or write, an indication that she received very little, if any, formal education. From early in her life, she began to grow to an unusually large size. Eventually, she stood over 6 feet tall, some accounts placing her as being 6 foot 2 inches, and weighing nearly 200 pounds as an adult. Despite her size, she was deemed to be an attractive woman, though one whose physical presence was always imposing, and some also even claimed that she had an hourglass figure. It was her size which eventually earned her the nickname the Great Western. This was taken from the SS Great Western, a British ship which in the 1830s became the first paddle-wheel steamship purpose-built for making transatlantic voyages, which passed regularly between England and New York. Sarah's life of adventure on the frontiers of America began around the same time that the SS Great Western began making its voyages across the Atlantic in the 1830s. Having married a soldier whose name has not survived, Sarah joined the US Army camp followers during the Second Seminole War. This was fought between the United States government and the Seminole Indians of Florida between 1835 and 1842. Sarah's role as a camp follower would have either been as a cook, laundress, or some other functional role in the upkeep of the military camp. The campaign in Florida was led by General Zachary Taylor, a man who would soon become the President of the United States, but before that led the US in one of its most significant wars of the 19th century. This occurred on the border with Mexico, and the outbreak of the conflict drew Sarah to Texas, from where we begin to get a much clearer idea of her life and actions. The Mexican-American War, which broke out in 1846, was caused by the disputed position of Texas on the border between the United States and the relatively new state of Mexico. Texas had formed part of Spanish Mexico for centuries, but when Mexico achieved its independence from Spain in the 1820s, the position of Texas became more controversial. As a result, in 1836, Texas broke away from Mexico and declared its independence as a new Republic of Texas. But this proved short-lived, and less than 10 years later in 1845, the region was formally annexed by the US. Mexico, though, was unwilling to accept this new state of affairs, particularly the American argument that the border between the US and Mexico should be located at Rio Grande. The government in Mexico wished for the frontier to be established further north at the Nueces River, and it was the dispute over this which eventually led to the outbreak of the Mexican-American War in 1846. Sarah soon distinguished herself on the border in the opening days of the war. The first clash between the Mexican and US troops occurred at the Arroyo Colorado River in Texas on the 21st of March 1846. Here, she offered to wade the river and attack the Mexicans herself, earning her a fiery reputation amongst the troops and camp followers. She was also remarried by now, her second husband being a Mr. Borghini or Borghini, probably an individual of French descent from Louisiana or the surrounding region where French settlement had been considerable in the 17th and 18th centuries. He was a soldier in the 5th Infantry Division, and so her life as a camp follower continued. In the weeks and months that followed, the Great Western earned a considerable reputation as a camp follower at Fort Brown in Texas. Here she ran a canteen for the officers, and gained some notoriety for her fearlessness when the garrison came under siege in May 1846. By this time, many stories of Sarah began to spread. She possessed an excellent set of skills. This can be seen when a Texas Ranger, John Salmon Ford, said of her, "She could whip any man, fair fight or foul. She could shoot a pistol better than anyone in the region, and at blackjack could outplay or outcheat the slickest professional gambler." Newspaper men as far away as New York and Philadelphia conveyed stories about the war in the Southwest back to the more settled East Coast, and wrote about the heroine of Fort Brown, who audaciously insisted on serving the troops 3 meals a day on the front lines as artillery exploded around her, and who even carried a musket on her person in case the fort was stormed by Mexicans. That same fort was never breached, and as the tide of the war turned against the Mexicans, the camp followers moved south along with the US Army. The Great Western went with them, and saw subsequent action at the Battle of Buena Vista in northern Mexico as a consequence, in February 1847. Thereafter, she established a hotel in Saltillo, in the northern Mexican state of Coahuila. Here she provided meals and lodgings for soldiers on their way to and from the front. She would remain there for the rest of the war, but ever having itchy feet, by the summer of 1848, shortly after the end of hostilities, she was requesting to be allowed to head west towards California. Meanwhile, the wider Mexican-American War ended in a complete disaster for Mexico. Having quickly secured the border region, US forces under General Winfield Scott advanced into Mexico itself early in 1847, and eventually occupied Mexico City. With this utter defeat, Mexico was forced to accept the US terms. Under the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, signed in February 1848, Mexico was forced to accept the US annexation of Texas, and to recognize the Rio Grande as the border between the two countries. As such, the conclusion of the Mexican-American War saw the establishment as Texas as part of the United States, and the modern-day border between Mexico and the US. With the war over, Sarah was soon on the move again. As we have seen, in 1848, she was stationed at Saltillo in northern Mexico, but with the end of the war, she had sought permission to head out west to California. There were numerous reasons for this. Her second husband seems to have been killed in the closing stages of the war with Mexico, and she found herself widowed. Also, the western frontier seemed an inviting prospect. Early in 1848, large gold reserves had been discovered out in California. This resulted in a mass migration of prospectors and others seeking economic opportunity to the west in the 6 or 7 years that followed. Known euphemistically as the 49ers, as many as 300,000 individuals headed out to California by the mid-1850s, amongst them many former soldiers and camp followers from the war. In the process, tens of thousands of adventurers set up villages and towns between Texas and California, acting as supply stations and settlements in their own right. The Great Western was amongst those who moved into this region. In 1849, Sarah arrived in El Paso in the far west of Texas. Here she briefly established a hotel which catered for the many 49ers traveling out west to seek their fortune in the goldfields of California. The so-called hotel is generally understood to have doubled as a saloon and a brothel, the first of many associations between Sarah and such establishments in the American West in the years that followed, though it is still a matter of debate as to whether the Great Western ran these establishments solely, or if she herself also worked as a prostitute. The nature of the hotel in El Paso is especially controversial, as Sarah quickly sold up to the US military and moved on again to Socorro, New Mexico. A further brothel was no doubt established here, at least that is the impression conveyed when we learn that Sarah was presiding over an establishment in Socorro with 5 orphan girls. She also married for a 3rd time while in town. Her new and final husband was the only one for whom we have a full name. He was Albert J. Bowman, an upholsterer from Germany who had enlisted as a soldier in the US Army and had been stationed as a dragoon in Socorro as one of the many servicemen appointed to the garrisons along the routes to California in the late 1840s and early 1850s. Given the ambiguities about her own birth name and those of her first 2 husbands, his surname of Bowman is that which has generally been applied to the Great Western. When Albert was discharged from the military late in 1850, he and Sarah renewed their nomadic ways, eventually reaching Fort Yuma. A considerable military station had been established here in the 1850s, on the triangular border between the newly formed state of California, the border with Mexico, and what would one day become the state of Arizona. In the months and years that followed, the Great Western lived on either sides of the border here, at one time serving yet again as a company laundress at Fort Yuma, and at other times dwelling in Mexico, as Albert found gold prospecting opportunities over the border. In these later years, Sarah developed into one of southern Arizona's most prominent business people, setting up additional restaurants and saloons when a new military garrison was settled at Fort Buchanan in 1856. While some of these were respectable establishments, it is almost certain that she had become the overseer of a network of brothels in Arizona by the late 1850s. There is concrete evidence to indicate that she was running a brothel in the small mining town of Fort Crittenden by this time, and in 1856 we find the Lieutenant Sylvester Maury, who passed through the area writing to a friend of his about Sarah, declaring that, among her other good qualities, she is quite an admirable pimp. By 1864, Albert and she had divorced, though this did not disrupt her business activity, and she continued to adopt several orphans and Native American girls, teaching them to support themselves by doing cooking and laundry. The Great Western eventually died on the 22nd of December 1866 from a venomous spider bite, perhaps being as little as 48 years of age, though more likely in her early 50s. She was buried in the cemetery at Fort Yuma the following day with full military honours. She had a peculiar life. On the one hand, she could be criticised for acting as a pimp to dozens of young women from Texas, west through to New Mexico to Arizona and Eastern California. But on the other hand, she was surviving as best she could in the harsh frontier region of America in the 19th century, and was teaching others who had come from disadvantaged backgrounds how to do the same. But whichever way she is looked at and remembered, there is no doubting that she was one of the most formidable frontierswomen of the southern United States, as the age of the American West was just beginning. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you thought of Sarah Bowman and her life, and if you thought she was good, bad, or anything else. If you're interested in these type of stories, make sure to subscribe. I upload every Tuesday, and I hope you guys have notifications turned on so you get my videos as soon as they're uploaded. If you have any suggestions, be sure to leave them down in the comments. And anyway, that's all from me, so I'll see all of you in the next Forgotten Life. Thanks.